My name's Matt Melendrez, and I'm on staff here with Crew. It's excited to be here with you all tonight. And a bunch of us just got back from the men's and women's retreats. Who went? Yes, solid. So those of you who don't know, we have a retreat every spring. It's usually around the first or second weekend of April, and it's where we all get away. The guys go up north, the girls go down south, and it's just a weekend where we get to hear from some speakers and do some worship. And I don't know what the girls do. I heard that Kelly Phillips killed it. Yeah. And for the guys, it's some people and I were having dinner tonight, and they're like, "So what did you have them bring?" I'm like, "We don't even provide water." And I actually forgot to tell the guys to bring water, so that was my bad. But I remember one of my friends asked, "How much vegetables do you bring?" And I'm like, "I don't know." But I was like, well, some guys, I forget who it was, just like barbecued a giant piece of garlic bread, cut it in half, barbecued a big piece of tri-tip, cut that in half, and just made these giant sandwiches. And just like walked around just like eating these sandwiches. I'm like, that's awesome. Yeah, we played games like Braveheart, where guys usually get hurt, but this year, no hospital visits. Praise the Lord. And yes, and it was just such a great weekend. Our speaker on the guys' side came out from Florida, and he brought his son, which was really cool to have his 16-year-old son with us for the weekend, and he just felt super honored and accepted by the whole group. And the best part of the weekend, at least for me, was on the second night we were there, we had a foot washing night. And the theme was brotherhood for the weekend, and we talked about brotherhood in the context of the gospel, in the context of living for a greater purpose, and also in fighting the battle. And so in this night, it was kind of the accumulation of the whole weekend, and we just got to, 7 guys, student leaders, got a bucket of water and just a towel in their hands, and went and just chose someone random, and 120 guys, and just went down, took off their socks, took off their shoes, washed their feet, dried their feet, and prayed with them. And most of the guys said they never experienced anything like that. And it was a night of just so much depth, and it was a very profound and sacred moment I experienced in the men's team, in the men's retreat. And I think the part that hit me most was our speaker went and got his bucket and went to his 16-year-old son and washed his son's feet and prayed for him. And I just lost it crying when I saw that. And I saw that, it was, after a day of Braveheart and me and, all that stuff, just to see this moment where I would say, this is a true man right now. This man had so much humility and vulnerability to serve his son in that way. And it just stuck out with me. And later that night, one of my friends and I were sitting down at the campfire, and we were just reflecting on it. And why was that so special to watch that whole night? And we're just talking about how in our culture, we have these views of what it means to be a man. And it was anything but that moment in our society. It was anything but this moment marked with humility and vulnerability. And so we just started talking about all these different aspects of what it means to be a man and the messages that we hear as men in our society. And tonight is about sexual violence, but I could not talk about sexual violence without first talking about masculinity and our culture view of it. Because we often hear this phrase, be a man. We hear it growing up in middle school and high school, college, post-college, in sports, and from our fathers. On all different aspects, we hear this term, be a man. And it's what does it actually mean? And I think at large, it means, being successful and powerful and having this great reputation. But that's something that's been created, and so it's what's called a social construct. And so a social construct is an idea that's been created and accepted by the people in society. So we have many social constructs in all kinds of aspects, but in this case, we have these social constructs when it comes to masculinity, these ideas of it, and we see this played out in movies, sports, and so on. And they've been very much accepted. And we have these messages that keep being told to us, this is what it means to be a man, be a man, be a man. And I think in all reality, we're all on this search and journey. What does it mean to be a man? And especially if you come from a broken home or you've been getting the mixed signals, you're asking yourself, what does it mean to be a man? Even when it comes to the church, I feel like we hear Bible stories of Samson, which is an awesome story, or we hear about David and Goliath, but we forget that David was also a poet. that David cried out to God constantly, and we have this beautiful piece of work in the Bible that's filled with his lament and complaints towards the Lord. And he was constantly crying out. But we don't talk about him being a man in that context, really. And I remember, this has been a personal journey for me too, because I think that growing up, I thought what it means to be a man is you love football, you know how to fix your car, you know, you love beer, you love girls, and like all these things, you're buff, and I think when you don't fit one of those things, it's really difficult, and then you feel less than a man. And I remember when my best friend and I, when we first met and started hanging out, Pat and I were going to have dinner, and we're driving from one side of town to the other. And then as I'm driving, my car just starts smoking. Like, it's like a straight up, it just like, I can't see. And so I start pulling over, and I just start panicking because I don't know a thing about cars. And I'm like trying to impress this guy that I just started becoming friends with. And I heard this comedian once say, if I'm driving and my car breaks down and my car light, my gas light isn't on, I'm screwed. And he didn't actually say that, but I cleared it up a little bit. But so I pull over, I'm like, oh my gosh, my gas light's not on, I'm screwed. And it was just this like longest minute, like where I get out of my car, go to the front, pop the hood, and I'm just hoping that he just like jumps in like, oh, this, and that. And it was like the longest minute of silence. And I just felt this deep sense of shame. I'm like, oh, I'm not a man, I don't know anything about my car. And it just like kind of time went on, and I'm like, does he know anything about cars either? And like, I just said, dude, I don't know anything about cars. He's like, me either. I'm like, oh, thank God. And then I'm like, oh, great, now we have a broken car. We don't know where to go. and it was something dumb that, I don't even know, but it was something really easy to fix later to find out. But that sense of shame was legitimate, though, in that moment of wanting to impress this guy who I just became friends with, and especially when it came to anything regarding my masculinity. And when we as men are striving for that, it's very easy for other men to take that away, to say something where you feel like your manhood is being taken away. And we see this happen all the time. And then it creates this deep sense of shame. And I think we see it in the next slide. We see these in a couple of words that are very strong in our language. And we have homophobia that takes place in our society. And we often use sexuality as a way to take away someone's manhood. We say words such as fag and faggot and homo. We say these words to each other in a moment where, oh, you don't like football, you're fag. Or you don't like this, you're a homo. And these are the words that are said to each other, which is so degrading to the gay community and so hurtful to that group. And then we also have sexism, where we have this poor view of women. We say, don't be a pussy when you're not doing something manly enough, or whatever it may be. And as I've really researched this over the last couple of years, what I've come to find is that homophobia and sexism is less about gender and sexuality and more about masculinity. Like when we're saying these things, we're actually we're not really, maybe some are truly homophobic and sexist, but it has more to do with masculinity than those groups. But still in doing so, we're hurting these groups of people, women and the gay community mainly. And so we have this deep sense of shame. And when we experience shame, anyone, we want to regain control. We want to do something to prove that what was said to us that caused that shame wrong. So we have shame. And then we have pride. And as men, we struggle with pride so much. We see pride taking in so many forms in our society. And I think the biggest part where I see this play out is when it comes to sex. And I was on a lot of different sports teams, football, water polo, swimming. I was in a fraternity, and the biggest message that I heard as I got older and older, as young as 12, like starting 12 and on, was like, you need to have sex from like peers. And like to be a man is to have sex, lots of it, and don't care about the women. Don't get emotionally invested. That's the message that was being communicated to me. And I'm sure if any of you were in a sport team or anything, you heard the same messages. I'm sure it varies in degree and the strength of it, but I'm sure that all of us have heard these things. And so what happens is when we hear these messages of you need to have sex, then we become entitled. Then we're entitled, prideful men who want to have sex and will do anything to get it. And so we have this culture and these social constructs. And I remember being in different settings in the dorms or in fraternity or playing sports where, like, when I came to Cal Poly, where it was like you knew the guys who were virgins and, like, your goal was to de-virginize them. Like, that's happening on the college campuses. And there's this deep sense of shame if a guy is 18, 19, 20 years old, mainly probably outside the context of a Christian community, but there is this deep sense of shame if you're an 18-year-old virgin. And again, that may not be true for people in this room, but for most people in this city and most college campuses, that's the case. And so there's this psychologist who said, the emotion of shame is the primary or ultimate case of all violence. The purpose of violence is to diminish the intensity of shame and replace it as far as possible with the opposite, pride, thus preventing an individual from being overwhelmed by the feeling of shame. It's better to be mad than to be sad. And so we have this connection between masculinity and violence. And I think the thing that goes where you have these social constructs of masculinity, how do you get from point A to point B? Well, it's pride and shame driving it. It's pride and shame, and the middle part is entitlement. And depending on what side you're for, you may be feeling a lot of shame because you're a virgin or whatever, or you might be really prideful. Look at all the girls I'm sleeping with. Both have an entitlement that lead to violence. All forms of violence, and in this case, sexual violence. So what is sexual violence? I'm going to define sexual assault. It's illegal sexual contact that usually involves force upon a person without consent, or is inflicted upon a person who is incapable of giving consent, as because of age or physical or mental capacity, or who places the assailant in a position of trust or authority. So I'm going to say sexual violence as an umbrella term for this talk, which is all-encompassing of child abuse, molestation, rape, sexual assault, harassment. It's kind of all-encompassing sexual violence. And why I became passionate about this was about 5 years ago, I got hired at Cal Poly University. And right down the hall from me was a department called SAFER, which is our campus's on-campus resource and prevention for rape and sexual assault. And I met this amazing person, Christina Caviani, who single-handedly has changed the environment and culture at Cal Poly for the better. And before she was here, there really was not much happening at Cal Poly and stopping and preventing and educating on sexual assault. And I got to interact with her, and I just became so inspired. This woman who is going across campus and educating people on this, trying to have people be safe, and they also provide counseling and crisis counseling on campus. And so as I saw this play out, I'm like, how can I get involved? And she says, we need men. We need men. There's no men in this movement at all. Maybe one or two. And so from that, I did a 6-week training where I got certified through the state of California as a domestic violence and rape crisis counselor. And so I went through this training, about 20 people. There was me and one other guy. After I did this training, I was a crisis counselor for the county for a couple years. And what that means is there's 2 crisis lines in our county, which someone can call when they feel like they're being abused, or they were raped, or they're being abused by their husband, or whatever it may be, any sort of violence. And I would take these calls and help these women through the night and try to get them to a safe place. And I can't share details of any of those calls, but there are some calls where I was totally traumatized for a week. The things I heard that men did to women, that men did to men, that husbands did to their wives, that fathers did to their children, it broke my heart, and there was days where I was just paralyzed of what I heard happening in the happiest city in the nation. And so I've got more involved, and I've done presentations around Cal Poly's campus, and I've been really praying and hoping for this night for a long time. And so to kind of further your knowledge and information on sexual assault, I want to share some statistics. And also at any point, if this is too heavy, don't feel bad if you need to step out, call someone, whatever it may be. You won't offend me. So rape. These are national statistics that are FBI, Center for Disease Control, all rape crisis centers. They're all the same. 1 in 5 women in America have been raped. 1 in 33 men have been raped. 1 in 10 women have been raped by an intimate partner. That means the rape occurred in a relationship or a marriage. 8 out of 10 cases, the victim knew the person who assaulted them. And that's a big thing to know. Most cases, it's through someone you knew. It's not some creep that comes out of the bush and attacks someone, although that does happen. But 80% of cases happen from someone they knew. Only 40% nationally of cases are reported. Child abuse. 1 out of 4 girls, 1 out of 6 boys, only 12% are reported in America. On the college campus, the stats get even more scary. 1 out of 5 women will be sexually assaulted, 1 out of 16 men. 90% of victims on college campuses do not report what happened. Domestic violence, which again, it's a violence happening in a relationship, whether it be marriage or just long-term commitment. And this can be psychological, emotional, physical, sexual, spiritual. 1 out of 4 women report domestic violence at some point in their lifetime. And until about 15 years ago, there was no rights for women in this case. Law enforcement, if they came after someone was calling, they wouldn't do anything. And here's, just so you can understand the gravity of this. Every 107 seconds, someone in America will be assaulted. So that means by the time tonight is finished, 51 people will have been assaulted, statistically. Sexual assault and abuse does not discriminate. It affects men, women, children of all races, of all socioeconomic statuses. And so there's some effects of sexual assault that I want you to know. Victims are 3 times more likely to suffer from depression, 6 times more likely to suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, 13 times more likely to have alcohol abuse, 26 more times likely to have substance abuse, and they're 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide. And there are many cases where after someone was raped on college campuses, they committed suicide because no one did a thing. And another thing to know when it comes to victims is that they carry this incredible shame. Incredible, deep shame. They believe that it was partly their fault. Which is why one of the biggest things you can do for someone when they tell you they've been sexually assaulted is tell them, I believe you. It sounds ludicrous to hear that, but it goes so far. Because there's this sense of shame, violation, you feel dirty. And they just want to be believed. So if we have these social constructs of masculinity that aren't enough, there's another one that kicks in. So let's say someone is a victim of sexual abuse or assault. Then the next thing that kicks in is victim blaming. Victim blaming is what it sounds like. It's blaming the victim for what happened. Questions such as, well, why did you drink that? Why were you wearing that? Why did you hang out with him? In a domestic violence situation, what did you do to make him mad that hit you? Why don't you leave him? These questions are putting the pressure on the victims. Society has put pressures on the victims. You see signs on college campuses until recently that said, don't get raped, as if you have any control over that. The relationship between the victim and the perpetrator is a very key relationship because society dictates who's going to get attention and who's going to get help. So I want to illustrate this with 4 sentences. So in the first sentence, John raped Mary. John is the subject, rape the verb. Mary was raped by John, difference. So now a little bit more focused on Mary. Mary was raped. John is nowhere to be found. Mary is a battered woman. This is what our society has done. We focus on the person and not the good ways, and that it's their fault. They're the main subject, and not the good ways, not in ways that is going to spark healing and redemption, but it's your fault. It's victim blaming. Where's the men? Where's the perpetrator in all of this? And along with victim blaming, we have a culture of silence. Because a lot of people can say, well, I don't abuse my wife, I don't abuse my child, I'm good. And that has made it worse because we have a lot of good men and women who don't do this, but their silence is allowing it to continue. So I want to give some examples of different parts of our society that show this view of masculinity and sex. We see this in all kinds of music all the time. And we have a song that came a couple years ago by Robin something. And this is a part of his song. And this is his music video. A guy in a suit and 3 girls who are barely dressed. Nothing like your last guy, he too square for you. He don't smack that ass and pull your hair like that. So I'm just watching and waiting for you to salute the true big pimpin'. Not many women can refuse this pimpin'. I'm a nice guy. Don't get confused, this pimpin'. This is the music that we're listening to. This is the music this generation is listening to. And he's just one of many examples of artists that have music videos like this where women are barely dressed and they're degraded and their lyrics show that they have total entitlement to sex. We see this in pornography. Hugh Hefner, the founder and father of pornography, said, "Women are sex objects. That's why they wear lipsticks and short skirts." And there's a growing number of pornography that men are looking at that is abuse. Like they're looking for abusive pornography. And these are the men who are married. These are the men who are in relationships, men who have daughters and sons. This is a very rapidly growing form of pornography that is being made and watched. We see this in peers. We see peers in guy circles, things being said, and no one's challenging it. 2 years ago, there was a USC fraternity who sent an email to the whole fraternity and said, "I will refer to females as targets. They aren't actually people like us men. Consequently, giving them distinctions is pointless. The only life worth living is that of a coxman." Somehow this leaked. And as people were trying to fight against this email and this person, there was so much support for the man who wrote this. So much support of people across the country saying, "Oh, like, leave him alone, like, whatever," and supporting him, like, he's right. So there's like groups of guys who see these things being said and then don't say anything. We see this in video games. Grand Theft Auto is a huge video game that many boys play. I played it before. In this video game, you can pull a girl into your car and have sex with her. The car shakes and you throw her out. This is the video games that boys are playing right now, that I played. And we see this in sports, which I would say sports is a very large influence in male culture. Bob Knight, he said this. Bob Knight is from Duke University, 10-time Coach of the Year, 2-time Hall of Fame. "I think if rape is inevitable, relax and enjoy it." He's leading the men on his basketball team. There was a situation in a high school on the East Coast a couple years ago where there was a hazing. And there was a group of older guys on the football team, quarterback, linemen, who at the boot camp before school started used broomsticks and acorns to sexually violate the freshman boys. And as the freshman boys shared with their parents what happened, the parents came to the school board. The school board canceled the football season, fired the coaches. So I'm so proud that this school board took a stance, but there was an uproar in this community. Women and men saying, "Why'd you cancel the football season? Why'd you fire the coaches? They didn't know, they're innocent." There was just hundreds of people supporting these high schoolers, seniors, who sexually violated these freshman boys. And in fact, these families got death threats. In fact, they continued to put these men on trial that they would be killed. This just happened a couple years ago. And the one that you're probably most familiar with, maybe you're not, is the Penn State situation that happened about 4 years ago. Penn State is a school that is very known for their athletics, and in the middle we have Jerry Sandusky, and he had this nonprofit for young boys. And about 4 years ago or 5 years ago, it came out that over the course of X amount of years, he had been molesting and raping about 10 boys. And there's someone who saw it, a janitor, and then went to report it, and every time he reported it, he got shot down. The head coach, Joe Paterno, the athletic director, the vice president, and the president of the school all knew what happened and did nothing. There's so many other parts of our society, economics, politics, religion, that you see this played out, which we don't have time to go into. But this is just a snapshot that you see these parts of our society influencing the way that men view women and sex. And then you have men who don't stand up. You have not many men who are saying this is wrong, at least at that level, who have that much influence on the media. Guys, this is the message that's been communicated to us growing up. This is the message that we've heard. Girls, I am so sorry the way that our culture views you. You don't deserve that. And I'm especially sorry for the ways that I've contributed myself. Because until 5 years ago, I didn't care. I was one of those guys in the fraternity, trying to hook up with girls and not caring. I was one of those guys that didn't say something when I saw something. Now, I want to bring up a really good friend of mine. I met her in San Diego about 5 years ago, actually, and we were a part of a group together, spiritual formation group, and we became really close, and I got to learn her story. And I invited her up here tonight so she can share her story with you. So if we can give a warm welcome to Catherine.
Hello.
We didn't plan this, by the way, our wardrobe. We just saw each other like, hey, what up?
He just likes to copy me.
But yeah, so this is Catherine. Catherine, why don't you just share where you're from, what you do first?
Sure, I am from San Diego, and I am an autism specialist who goes into people's homes and helps reduce problem behavior in kids with autism and increase skills that we want to see increased. Yeah, thanks.
So yeah, when we were together in our group 5 years ago, you shared parts of your story of what happened to you when you were in college. So I would love for you to share what happened to you that moment.
Okay. So I ask for your grace. This is my first time sharing this publicly, so I'm a little nervous. But it was the beginning of my senior year of college, almost 10 years ago, and it was one of my sorority sister's 21st birthdays. So we started off at the fraternity house across the street from us, just pre-partying and getting to hang out with the guys. And then we went downtown clubbing, and like most 21st birthdays, my friend drank way too much, way too fast. And we ended up having to take her home early, Santa Barbara early. And so we ended up continuing our night by going back to the guy's house and hanging out with them. It was a group of guys that I hung out with pretty regularly, and they had a new housemate who's a transfer student that I had seen and talked to a few times, and he asked me if I wanted a drink, so he made me a drink, and the next thing that I remember is waking up in his room with all of my clothes off and him sexually assaulting me. The night just continued to be a night of pure hell, really. Just him saying very degrading things, that I was dirty and worthless, and that it was my job or women's job to pleasure and be used by men. And I just remember wondering and praying, why isn't anybody coming to look for me? Please, God, send someone through that door. I was paralyzed for a good portion of the night, which made me realize that I had been drugged by that drink that he gave me. And I really couldn't do anything to fight back. So by the end of the night, nobody came looking for me, and none of his roommates came into the door or into the room or anything like that. He forced me to take a shower, and then he threatened my life, and I went home.
Thank you for sharing that. What was your journey after that? And just with people you told, how you viewed God?
I felt really abandoned by God and by my friends. I also was really embarrassed, and I didn't want anyone to know what happened. I wanted to, I'm not really sure, and I'm not really sure why that was the case, but it was. I just was really embarrassed. I felt like there must be something wrong with me if I attracted this type of individual to myself. And in thinking about why nobody came, I really blamed God. I felt like he should have done something to save me. I felt like I had been doing everything right in the Christian sense of things, as far as leading Bible studies and being involved in my church and saving myself for marriage, and it was just all taken from me. And so I remember saying to God, like, if this is your plan for my life, screw you and screw your plans. And I turned my back on him and didn't want to have anything to do with him or anything regarding being a Christian. Instead, I had so much pain that I was carrying around that the only thing that fixed it was drinking and partying and having unhealthy relationships with men. I tried to regain control by using my sexuality to manipulate men, and I got a good sense of security back in doing that. And it was a very, very, very dark time in my life. And then one day, one of my Christian friends wanted to have coffee, probably about 5 or 6 months later. I still hadn't told anyone what had happened. And she confronted me, noticing the change in my behavior. And so I told her what happened. And the first thing that she said to me was, maybe if you hadn't been drinking, this wouldn't have happened to you. And it just crushed me. Just reinforced all the lies that I had believed, that it was somehow my fault, somehow I deserved it. So then not only did I want to have nothing to do with God, I wanted to have nothing to do with Christians. Stopped hanging out with all my Christian friends and really just continued to survive by drinking and numbing the pain as much as I could. So that continued for years, really. I moved back to San Diego after graduating from college and continued in the same type of lifestyle. And then one day I remember waking up after a party and clearly hearing God's voice say, and the verse John 10:10 popped in my head. The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I come to give life and give it to the full. And I remember thinking, my life sucks. I hate my life. I wonder what life in the full would be. And I just heard God say, Catherine, I have so much more planned for you than this, what you're engaging in. I understand why you're engaging in it, but I have so much more for you. I wasn't ready yet to go back to God, but I did hit rock bottom in just deep sadness, and the alcohol wasn't killing the pain anymore. It just was too much. So I started to go back to church. I would walk in and walk right back out. I had to shape my behavior. And then God put people in my life, one of whom used to go to SLO. He became an aide in my classroom and was in the band at a church. So he invited everybody from work to go to the church to see him in the band. It became a social thing. So I would go to see Danny in the band and hang out with people from work. And the truth of who God is really started to shine through that brick wall that I had built up. And I learned that it was not God's will for that to happen to me. I learned that Jesus in the Bible said once that if you see me, you see the Father. And throughout all of history of recorded life of Jesus, he not once said, "Hey, disciples, let's go rape that girl so that I can use it for my glory." Every single person who came up to him was healed. He rose the dead to be living. And so I really chose to believe that it wasn't God's will, but I still was angry that he didn't stop it from happening. I wanted to know, where was he that night? And then I was in a group where we had a retreat, and you were there. We were praying through rejecting lies and accepting the truth. And people were praying through some pretty dark things, And I was praying, I reject the lie that I'm damaged goods, and I and I choose to believe the truth that I'm beautifully and wonderfully made. And then I felt God tell me, urge me to say out loud that I reject the lie that God wasn't there that day, but I don't know where he was. And I just prayed that he would reveal that to me. And then he gave me this vision and told me, "Catherine, I was there that day. I was holding you through it. I was screaming no because you couldn't. And if you're willing, I can carry you out of that room, and you don't have to be stuck there anymore." And I knew at that moment that I had a choice. I could choose to stay stuck, figuratively in that room, or I could choose to let God carry me out. And he just gave me this really beautiful vision of him picking me up off the bed and sheltering my eyes so I didn't have to see, and picking me up and taking me out of the room. And from that moment on, I've really been fighting to not let the thief kill, destroy anything else in my life, and really trying to figure out and enjoy that life and life to the full.
Amen. So now you have this whole audience here. Catherine, what would you like to say to them tonight?
I would like to say that if you have been affected by sexual violence of any kind, that it is not your fault. You did not deserve it. You are not to blame. And that you are stronger than you know. And that I'm praying that you would be able to feel God's tangible presence in your life each day. I would also tell the men in this room that the reason I finally said yes to sharing my story today is because it was really exciting to me to potentially be a part of a movement that was encouraging men to stand up and protect that which is precious to God. And I, as a woman, want to feel protected, and to just see men, even today, walking around with the blue ribbons on,
you have no idea how that affects me, and I just want to thank you. And I want to thank you because you're a big part of my story, and I know it took a lot of courage to apologize, and that didn't mean a lot.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks so much, Catherine, for that courage. Yeah, it was such a joy to be at that retreat that she was referring to about 5 years ago, and just the power of Christ when you have other people in your story reminding you of who you are. And there are times that you need people in your life to fight like hell for you because it's so difficult to see the truth and see the light when something so dark is a part of your story. My favorite quote ever by Martin Luther King was, "In the end, we will not remember the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And this is so applicable in so many areas of our society. At the time was racism, it has to do with sexual violence, and so many other parts of our society. Men have been too silent for too long when it comes to this. And I would even go further in saying, as Christian men, we have been far too silent. For most of history, this has been sexual violence, sexual assault has been said it's a women's issue or a feminist issue. And this isn't true when 99% of the perpetrators are men violating men, women, and children. And we as men need to see that this is our problem. This is our peers, our friends, our coworkers, whoever it may be that are doing this evil. We need to be the ones that challenge it. And the way our society is set up is one that defines masculinity a certain way that leads to violence, and then there's a culture of silence and victim blaming. And there aren't a lot of people who are standing up against it. There's a lack of accountability on so many levels. But one person who has been very inspiring to me when it comes to this subject is my father. He's been a human resource manager for most of his life and a vice president of several different companies. And there was a moment, or a time about, I don't even know, like 5 or 6 years ago maybe. He was doing a sexual harassment presentation to a group of about 50 men and making it very clear that he has zero tolerance when it comes to his employees. This group of 50 men literally just walked up, went to the next room, and sat in on a benefits, like insurance and all that kind of stuff, presentation that was given by a woman. The entire time the woman was giving her presentation, there was a guy in the far back making sexual gestures and facial expressions at her the entire time. She reported to my dad, which is so courageous, because oftentimes, sometimes a victim may, for a variety of reasons, may not want to put someone else get someone else in trouble. And sometimes it gets them in trouble in these weird, twisted ways. But she reported to my dad, and he called the guy in, and he said, "I made it clear to you, you're terminated, get out." He made it very clear. And my dad, over the years, has had to fire supervisors, directors, and vice presidents for harassing men and women. And he was just telling me the other day, it is so sad to see how many people in these positions of authority abuse their power. And this happens in so many ways. I want to point us, though, to Jesus, because Jesus is the ultimate example and the ultimate way that we can fight this. Because we're talking about social constructs that need to be broken in our society. We have this very broken system that is allowing these evils to happen, and we need to challenge it. When we look at Jesus, when he was alive, walking on earth in the New Testament, he was constantly battling social constructs and norms and laws. Jesus constantly was challenging these things and putting himself right in the middle of these situations. He spoke to women in public and allowed non-relative women to touch him in public, which wasn't allowed. He touched lepers and outcasts. He challenged religious authorities and called out their hypocritical and rigid, emotionally harmful practices. He challenged religious law, completely turning things around. A good example of that is the woman caught in adultery when these men brought her and were going to stone her. And Jesus said, those who are without sin cast the first stone. Just totally flipped that social construct. He challenged classism, saying the poor will be first. Health and wealth were thought of as ways that God blessed people in that time. And illness and poverty were things that were a curse from God. But he challenged that. Jesus was one who always challenged the culture, humbly, through the power of the Father, but he did it. He stood between the oppressed and the oppressors constantly. And it was incredibly uncomfortable, cost him his reputation at times, caused him to get killed. The point of tonight is not to shame anybody, no matter who you are. Because when I even think about these social constructs, I was there. And in some ways, probably still am. My heart is to inform and educate you so that when you leave tonight, when you go on campus, when you go get jobs at Google and Facebook and Chevron, when your teachers and lawyers and doctors are fathers, that you would challenge these social constructs. Because a true man is one who's humble and vulnerable. It's the father who goes down and washes his son's feet and prays over him and tells him, I love you. That's humility and vulnerability. Because in order to fight this, you need humility, because by definition, humility is caring about others more than yourself. And so if you're going to put yourself between someone who's being oppressed, you have to be humble, because you might lose your job, you might have to quit your job, you might have to lose friends. I don't know what might happen, but in order to stand up against this, you have to have humility and vulnerability. I dream of a day where we don't need any more sexual assault centers or women's shelters. Or I dream of a day where women, men, and children don't have to live in fear of being violated, abused, or assaulted. Where there's no more stories of this evil. So as I end this, I want to ask all the men in the room to stand up right now. When I look out, I don't see the problem. I see the solution. Every single one of you is the solution. Every one of you have positions of influence. Every one of you has areas that you can speak into. I'm not saying this to be sexist, but sometimes in certain settings, men, their voice is heard louder than women. I hate that, and I hope that can change. But use that for your good. Be a man who seeks humility all the days of your life. In every part of your life, not just this, but in this case, in this area. Be a man who gently and boldly challenges the social constructs that lead to sexual violence. Be a man who loves deeply everyone around you. And keep your eyes on Jesus, because it's only through him that we can be humble and vulnerable and courageous and bold. You can sit down. When I was going through the crisis training 5 years ago, there was so much that I was trying to process. It was so heavy. And I remember I was in a church service, and I heard this passage. It totally rocked me. And that gave me this vision that carried me through some of the darkest calls I ever had to make. And I want to end the night with this, Isaiah 62. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance on our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garment of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that they may be glorified.